Don't you think it's about time for a podcast that's more fulfilling? One that's about the vibrant exchange of ideas and perspectives that happens when we actually come together. We got you covered. Welcome to the Deep Blue Project, where the depths of conversation meet the waves of personal experience. This is a real, raw, and unscripted show about everything from leadership lessons to self-awareness, wellness, and the latest current events. We cover it all. We have a rotating cast of guests as we share our personal stories, insights, and opinions on the issues that matter most. Plus, we have a blast while doing it. The Deep Blue Project. It's not just a podcast, it's an experience. And now your host, Chris Workman.
All right, so everybody, welcome back to the Deep Blue Project. We took a couple days off as I was trying to finish my new venture, which was my book. So I got to plug a book because obviously, since I'm the host and I wrote a book, I have to plug it. So it is called Silence Behind the Blue Wall, and it is about surviving the mental health stigma in police culture. So you can go to our website, you can go to Amazon.com and search Silence Behind the Blue Wall. It's available on Kindle, it's available hardback, paperback, whatever you like. So now that I've done that little plug, I want to welcome my guest, friend of mine. Got to know him very well over the last few years. Great to hang out with, gotta say that. Matt, welcome. Welcome to the Deep Blue Project, my friend.
Chief, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here with you.
Oh, dude, I am so glad. I've been wanting to get you on. You're just one of them feel-good guys who does a lot of stuff for Lita. You put a lot of stuff out there, and I know, like, when we get together, we have fun. So
Absolutely.
A lot of people out there don't know you like I do. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Matt?
Yeah, glad to. Yeah, so my name is Matt Fagiana. I am from Knoxville, Tennessee. Originally, I grew up actually in Sevierville, Tennessee, which if people are familiar with that area, it's kind of a tourist destination capital of the world where Dolly Parton is from. So in the foothills of the Smokies. Started in law enforcement in 2000 with the Gatlinburg Police Department, actually. So it's another famous, popular destination. I tell people it was the greatest place in the world to be a cop at my age. It was kind of like being a cop at Disney World. A lot of tourists, a lot of fun stuff going on during the daytime. So great place to start. And then actually was there for a short time, about a year and a half, when 9/11 happened. And so that led me to the Tennessee Highway Patrol as a state trooper. They hired a pretty large class at the time in response to 9/11. Was there, and then I spent the rest of the majority of my career after I left THP with the sheriff's office. Found that I really enjoyed that camaraderie, that local level of law enforcement. State's great, wonderful place to train, and certainly a prestigious agency. But, there's something to be said about helping people with everyday problems. And there's some cops that really enjoy that, and I was one of those. By the time I left, when I retired in 2022, I had 22 years in. I was a squad commander, patrol sergeant over night shift. I ran our night shift division. I also did all of our grants and also ran our social media and media relations. I was our communications director, which has kind of brought me to how you and I got to meet.
Gatlinburg, I love Gatlinburg. I say it's like they took a boardwalk and they shoved it in the middle of the mountains. My wife and I went there a couple of years ago. Yeah. I remember walking in there, walking down the street and being like, wow, it's like they just took like a boardwalk from Atlantic City, just dropped it in the middle of the mountains.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. So I have to give a little shout out. So my very first FTO, his name was Ronnie Barrett, and he just got promoted to the police chief in Gatlinburg. So that's how you know you're getting old when you're young FTOs and you're a young rookie, and now he's the chief. Rocking up there. They're doing great things. So, it's a great place.
That's great. So Matt teaches the MPO classes. which is the public information officer for a lot of you guys. We call it MBO for FBI LEDA. So there's a lot. It takes a lot to kind of be able to teach people how to do that. I know in being a chief of police, it's tough to learn that area. So how did you really get your niche into getting into LEDA and teaching the media and public relations courses?
Yeah. So I was a FBI LEDA student first. I think it's important to point that out. I saw the value in learning from a reputable organization. At the time, Judy Powell was instructing most of these courses across the country. For those that don't know, Judy Powell has quite the legacy in law enforcement, communications, public relations, media relations. She's been at New York Police Department, NYPD as a deputy commissioner, Baltimore under Tony Batts. I mean, she's a rock star. So Judy was an instructor for both of my programs. And that's how I first really got kind of bought into the LEDA way of doing things. I was able to put that into practice in the way that I performed as our agency's spokesperson. When I was getting ready to retire, I was teaching for another organization in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee. I was teaching at the academy. I knew I wanted to keep teaching, but I was ready to potentially step outside of Tennessee. We were moving out of state. And it just so happened that Judy was getting ready to retire from FBI LEDA and go out and do some stuff that she had been working on. And so Judy really facilitated that introduction, which led to me getting an interview and going through the process to instruct at FBI LEDA.
I know being public information officer and communications was kind of your thing when you were with Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, correct?
Yes.
So I think one of the things that a lot of us don't put a high priority on is that part of our job. And I know that through a lot of our talks and a lot of things that goes on, that your kind of reach now by teaching through LEDA. I see a lot of MPOs out there giving you a good shout out because of things that they've learned from your classes that they're now having to use due to the way we have to deal with the media nowadays. So maybe speaking about what you feel is the importance of that and what that has to be for departments and why they should really start concentrating on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because it's probably one of the most important things that we could talk about today. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, if an agency was even fortunate enough to have a PIO, one, it was probably restricted to your larger agencies, your Baltimores, your NYPDs, LAPD, that type of thing. But if they had that position, more than likely that person was just really a gatekeeper of information. That person was taking care of files, information requests, that type of stuff that the media would have. The chief would come in and say, hey, I need to do a press release. And that person would sit at the typewriter or the huge computer that we used to have that the youth don't know about now. And they would type up a press release. And I call it a press release during that time. We don't even call it a press release anymore. But we call it a press release then because we had to use the press 100% to get our information out. They were really the only conduit of information at that time. This was before social media channels, all the things that we have now. So really, television, print, radio, that was it. If you wanted to get something out, right, into your community. Now, you jump ahead where we're at now. I think agencies are starting to see the importance of it, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think more importantly, command staff is starting to understand that your public information officer, especially in a time of crisis when the world is watching, it is as important to have a trusted, trained PIO sitting at your table as it is your legal counsel. You don't have to go too far back in history to start talking about the lessons learned. We can go to Uvalde when the school massacre at Robb Elementary School happened. We are still studying and learning from the recent Department of Justice After Action Review that came out. There's a chapter just dedicated to the communication failures that took place in Uvalde. And Chris, even though we know the operational responses led us to question how they were handled today in Uvalde and Uvalde County, those agencies, law enforcement agencies, are still having trouble rebranding and building that trust back just because of the way they communicated things out and the way they didn't do it effectively. So I think now instead of those large agencies that you see with PIOs, we're starting to see a movement all across America. Every agency realizes the importance of having a trained crisis communications, a trained brand manager, if you will, at the table. We also know that most of our large crises, most of our school shootings, all the things that we talk about nowadays in our society, they happen in small communities. Think about the last time you heard of a school massacre, really, other than Nashville. The majority have been Uvalde, Sandy Hook, Parkland, small communities, Columbine. Right. So, it's definitely shifted into a role that now has to be placed as a top priority to have someone doing it.
Right. So as we grow and as we move on, and especially being more, I guess, more in tune to what FBI lead is doing, obviously more now than I used to be because of the position that I'm in, but seeing that grow and seeing how many classes that are starting to happen across the nation. I mean, initially we had this conversation before we came on when you got started. So, I mean, retirement, we always go, well, let me think about how much I want to do, how much I don't want to do. You have your thing with wanting to be a pilot, which I think is cool, and we're going to get to that because I think that's a cool thing also. Yeah. So, but the purpose of having that class, and how do you see that growing now that you've spent a little over 2 years now, correct?
Yep.
In teaching with Lydia, how do you see that growing with Lita and having these classes?
Well, first of all, shameless plug out to the board and what you guys are doing, and our executive team in Philadelphia, in Malvern there, and the staff there, because it is a huge animal. And I'm not even talking about the leadership stuff. I mean, that is another ginormous animal. When you think about the media stuff that we're doing, there's 5 of us right now instructing. I work alongside 4 other very experienced and rock star law enforcement communication experts. Adam, Paul, Stephanie, and Sarah, and then myself. Roundabout number, if you think about just this year alone, we're probably delivering close to 70 classes across the U.S. just in crisis communications, media relations. The one shift I have started to see, and I think it's a way that maybe we're marketing it, which is awesome. It's also the fact that we've bridged a relationship with our LEDA trilogy instructors, is that instead of just seeing PIOs in our class now, every class that we have is a mixture of PIOs and command staff, because it's one thing for your PIO to be highly trained, to have all the tools necessary to navigate through a really bad crisis. But it is another thing to have a command level CEO, that sheriff, that chief, that state colonel, that understands why we're communicating the way we are, when we are. Because when a crisis hits, you've got to be able to trust that PIO. I wrote an article recently. I talked about this. If you're working a school shooting as a police chief in your community, one, probably the worst day of your career, the most difficult day of your career, the most challenging. There's so many adjectives we can go on to use. The last thing that you're going to have time to do as a chief is to coordinate media relations and handle that stuff. You're going to be busy leading an agency, investigating a scene, assuring the public that they're safe, working with families and victims, dealing with all the agencies that are coming in. As a chief, you will be the busiest you've ever been in your career. So for you to look across that command post, or you to look across the scene and see that trusted PIO that you have sent to training, you've been to the same training, understand what they're doing, then it's a seamless communication release that will help the community do what they need to do at the right time.
I was going to ask you about that, so you kind of really led right into it. We do a lot of things on LinkedIn right now. I mean, that just seems to be the professional kind of back and forth and networking tool that has helped a lot of us. And I think it's great because I've read a lot of great things and a lot of great articles and things coming from people who probably wouldn't normally put these things out there or give you this information. And I think what you're talking about is you did a great article back on September 20th, which was about why every police agency needs a dedicated PIO. If you want to kind of dive into it a little bit of those things that need to be done now, because we all know with social media, with the way things get out there nowadays, how quickly somebody's putting something out on something that's occurring. Heck, there's a car accident. There could be a car accident out on the street in front of my house, and in about 5 seconds, it's going to be somebody's going to post it already. So what do you feel, and how do you feel that kind of relates to that importance of now having that dedicated person?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about in the article when I'm talking about as a chief. You have so many things that you're going to have to handle if a crisis strikes. And what is a crisis? I mean, a crisis for some has been a school shooting. For others, it's a line of duty death, in a department of 5 people. Maybe it's a member suicide. I mean, crisis come in all forms. And so to have somebody that is trained and knows how important it is for us to start speaking immediately when a crisis happens. The quicker we take control of the messaging, the quicker we can control the narrative, we can make sure the truth is put out there. If we don't do that, I use the example all the time in class. If you have 17 patrol cars and 5 ambulances that pull up to the front of the mall in your community, and I'm looking at your social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we'll talk about why all of those things are important. But if I'm looking at it and I don't see anything for hours, all I have to do is go to your community's Facebook page, like the What's Happening in Knoxville crime page or the Gossip Knoxville page on Facebook. And you'll see a dozen different narratives of what's happening. Somebody's going to tell you they saw a plane flying low and they bet it was a plane crash in the mall. Other people are going to say, I saw a guy in a trench coat walking towards the mall earlier. I bet it was a shooter. So that's what happens, right? Because if we're not talking, we live in a society where if they don't hear it, they're going to create the narrative. Everybody wants to be first up to bat, right? Even our news media. If we see that now, media has shifted away from reporting now that they're speculating, right? They're jumping the gun too. They'll break the news all the time. And the breaking news says 5 large police presence in downtown Knoxville at Publix supermarket. Stay tuned for more. They don't even know what it's about. And then they get there and find out it was a gas leak. And they're like, oh, well, there's no story here. But again, so when we have that crisis breakout, someone has to be responsible for thinking, I need to start communicating this out as soon as possible so that we can control the narrative and give people the right instructions on what to do.
I think the importance is us knowing that. Now, I've had the opportunity to take the PIO class, took it with Sarah, she's awesome to take it with. We are very, very lucky for FBI leader, and that's just not me being biased. That's me just knowing the kind of people that teach for this organization, and I'm sure they can hear your passion about it and why I get so geeked out about it because everybody, they're passionate about doing their job and instructing, but they're passionate about making sure that their students and the law enforcement officers out there are really grasping what you guys are trying to put out there. And I think that when we see that, the social media thing is so important nowadays. As we mentioned, LinkedIn's a big thing. While that's not like Facebook, but you still see stuff on there. Once in a while, I see people getting political. But with the Facebook, with Instagram, Twitter, people are popping stuff out so much. So I think you started to kind of get into it, but maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit, as how that social media dynamic drives a lot of that.
You mentioned earlier that years ago, the only conduit of information, our only conduit to our audience was our local media, right? We now have the power to disseminate information to our audiences via multiple platforms. Now, let's talk about audiences first, because this is something that a lot of operationally focused command staff don't always think of if they've never taken a class like this. First of all, they think about their audience being the average 40 to 65-year-old adult male or female in their community. That's their typical audience. It's easy for a chief or a sheriff who has never had this type of training to think of their audiences as them, right? We always think in our own lens. Well, the first thing that you have to do as a department, I don't care if you're the smallest department in Connecticut or the largest department on the west coast of California, you got to know who you're talking to. That's the first step. And that's thinking, who do we serve? What are our demographics like? For example, if you are in a small town where you have 50% of your population is Caucasian and 50% of your population is from South America, are you reaching them appropriately? Because we talk like us, right? We think this is America, and we just put our messages out in English. So a lot of times, if we don't consider that, we're missing half our audience. The second thing is you got to think of the age demographics. I always get tickled when I meet people from different agencies and they're like, yeah, we have a Facebook page. That's what our chief is comfortable with. And that's the only thing we have. I'm like, okay. So, hey, you got prom coming up. It's prom season, right? Are y'all putting out public service announcements to try to reach people about prom safety and DUI, underage drinking, and, all these responsible decisions that we're trying to encourage? Yeah, they're like, yes, we're doing this awesome video on prom safety for our community. I'm like, that's awesome. And you're throwing it on Facebook, right? Because that's your only platform. Like, yeah, Facebook. I'm like, congratulations. You have failed to reach any of your audiences of your intended target, and you are only talking to their parents and grandparents because teenagers aren't on Facebook.
Right.
Teenagers are on Instagram. Teenagers are on YouTube. Teenagers are on TikTok. Teenagers are on Snapchat. And every one of these platforms has a route for you to talk to them. You can put up videos and reels and different stuff for them. Another thing is, how do we talk to them? You can't put out the same message for a group of adults that you put out for kids. For teenagers, you got to speak in their language. You got to know some slang and some swag, and you got to be kind of to speed with what the current trends are that they like. And if you can mimic those trends, you gain their attention. If we can gain their attention and get them to start following us on the platform that they want their information put out through, then we can start putting out messages to them that they'll understand in a way that is meant for them. So, for example, right now, there's a recent report that just came out about social media platforms in the U.S. broken down by age demographics. YouTube and Facebook are the two most widely used platforms. If you start talking about young people, then you're talking about that Instagram and TikTok. Surprisingly, I have agencies that will tell me that they only push out crisis information like breaking news, like an active shooter. It would go out through their X account or their formerly known as Twitter account. And Chris, did you know that it's like 22% of Americans now are using Twitter?
Wow.
It's falling off. It's falling off, whether it's because of the sale that happened and all the different stuff but it's not a widely used platform. So for us to be successful, first of all, we have to have all those platforms if we want to reach everybody. So we're starting to see agencies that are realizing that. They're creating those YouTube channels so they can put videos up on there. They're creating those Facebook posts that are meant for like that Facebook demographic. They're creating fun videos and reels for Instagram and TikTok and for Snapchat that are meant for young people. And so that's an important part. If you want to reach everybody in your community, you got to give them the information they want in a way that they want to receive it.
That's a good point. And I think a lot of us being, I'm going to say older, I'm going to put myself in that category. I mean, because I think that you made a great point of the fact that we, especially if you're small, okay, you're so overwhelmed if you don't have those PIOs, if you don't have them people, and it can't be the chief. It really cannot be. Because I can say from my own way of doing things, while I try as much as I can to get things out or do what I just got so much going on during the course of the day. It's virtually impossible.
Absolutely.
It's virtually impossible.
Absolutely.
You need somebody who can bridge that gap and somebody who's used to it.
So here's something cool. And a matter of fact, you read the article I wrote, so I put a little part in there because there's a lot of small agencies that say, okay, you know what? I agree with you. I get it. I'm the chief or I'm the sheriff. I realize I can't do that, especially in times of a crisis, but even just day-to-day operations. I'm busy leading and managing. So I get it. I want a PIO. Here's the other thing. We don't have a huge budget. What can I do? Right? Because PIOs are not cheap if you hire a trained professional PIO. They come with a price tag. I tell people, please stop looking beyond the most obvious. You probably have, and I say you as a general term, you probably have young men and women in your department right now. And I'm not even talking about rank. Right. That's another conversation I can have. Rank doesn't equal the best communicator in the room.
Very much so. Right.
A 24-year veteran now, I can say I get it. I came from an era when it used to be the highest rank in the room was the one that talked to the camera. Not necessarily the best choice to happen anymore. We've seen CEOs, chiefs, sheriffs, captains, lieutenants, they have lost their jobs because they spoke to the camera and weren't prepared and said the wrong thing, and it led to, their demise. So I tell people a lot of times, look in your agency. If you're trying to be creative and come up with a PIO, don't forget about the slick sleeves, as we call them, in your organization. One, they're probably going to be more tech savvy than us, right? Because they grew up in technology. They've grown up with Facebook, Twitter, all these video reels. I mean, my 10-year-old nephew now can make a TikTok reel with all kinds of different additions. And I mean, they're brilliant at it. But they're also usually more willing to be adventurous and try new things for you. So giving them kind of things, say, hey, this is something I'm going to give you We'll get you some training. I want you to be creative. I want you to think about the different ways to reach your audiences and how we're going to do that. So there's probably some really good people in your organization that would be exceptional at this role. You just have to get past the mindset of saying, okay, I'm not just going to promote the highest ranking guy in the room to do this. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is there's a lot of people out there, especially on LinkedIn. Certainly all of our staff at LEDA, me, Stephanie, Sarah, Adam, and Paul, we're willing to help small agencies. Like you want to figure out how to set it, call me. Like I promise you, I'll set aside the time to help you figure out how you can set this up. What's some of the basics that you can do to start reaching the people you need to reach should something happen. You see it almost every class I have, as sad as this is to say, I will tell them more than likely somebody in here will have a crisis that will occur, a big crisis within just a matter of months after this training. We had the Memphis PIOs just months before they had the Memphis Five, the 5 officers indicted for murder. We had the Colorado Springs PIO team just a few weeks before they had 5 people shot at a local gay bar and killed in an active shooter event there. We had a few weeks ago in Clemson, I had a ton of Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina folks in my class. And now almost every one of those folks in that class have been working around the clock in one of the worst natural disasters they've ever seen. Right. And they're saying, hey, this training was invaluable to help us figure out how to navigate this. So, get that person some training, put up some easy platforms, and you can, even if you're small, you can take this in the right direction so you're prepared.
If you're listening now, you're kind of getting a little piece of what these guys do every week when they're out there teaching this class. I mean, they're giving this information and doing this every week out there somewhere. And unfortunately, I've read the same thing. I mean, places you have been, just as you said, they're having incidents and they're putting this stuff to the task right away. And they're grateful. And they're grateful because I've seen them put it on there, like just thanking you or thanking Adam or any of you, because they've had that class and it prepared them for that. So there's 2 classes that FBI LEDA teaches, okay, when it comes to media.
Yeah, world, yep.
Yep, and there's a basic one, but there's also one that's a little bit more in-depth. I want to kind of have you touch on because it goes a little bit deeper. I mean, you have that kind of pre-class, which I think I call the basic one. It gets you kind of started.
I'm glad you bring those up because a lot of people don't realize the difference in the two. So we have at FBI LEDA currently 2 media track classes. The first one is called the MPR, Media and Public Relations, and the second one that you got to take the MPR first. The second one is our MPO, and that's the Master PIO program. The first one is a lot of meat and potatoes, ground level. I always say a crisis in action. We cover a ton of stuff of you've got this happening now. How do you respond to it immediately? What things are you putting out? How are you putting it out? What's your message now? What's your message going to be in a couple of hours? How does it change over the course of the next 72 hours? Those type of things. We do a ton of in-class exercises, tabletop exercises. We realize that some people have never been in front of the camera before. They've never been in front of a crowd for like a news conference. And so we simulate those things. They do one-on-one camera interviews with us where we go over just the basics. How do you stand? How do you look? How do you focus on being grounded so that you're not moving and swaying? So some of just the techniques of interviewing. And then we talk about how you answer different questions and how you put out your message. Then we do tabletop scenarios where they're actually orchestrating live news conferences in class in front of their peers. So some are the PIOs and some are actually acting as the chiefs. And of course, sometimes we have chiefs and sheriffs in class, so that even works out even better. But we're making them run through the motions and we're drilling them with questions that we would anticipate journalists to ask. Because as you mentioned, Chris, we have people that do that. That's the only time they've ever practiced. And 3 weeks later, I'll use Dana White as an example. Dana White was the PIO for Michigan State Police or Michigan State University Police. She went back a few weeks after class and they had an active shooter on campus that killed several people. And she's putting it to work. And we saw her take what she learned in class, the practice and the exercises she did in class at Michigan State Police. And she was able to put it into play during a time of crisis. So we realize this may be the only opportunity you ever have to practice swinging at that ball before it's game day. So that's the first class, kind of in a nutshell. Just a lot of teamwork. The second class, the MPO, is more of a strategic approach to being a communications director or a public information officer. If I'm Chris Workman's PIO, I'm not always responding to crisis, thank God, right? We don't have a crisis every day, hopefully. But I come to Chris Workman and I say, Chief, what are your goals for the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? And you say, well, Matt, I'm glad you asked. My goal here is to add 5 new patrol officers within the next 2 years, and I would like to also build a new facility. And so you and I then talk about how I can take your strategic goals and roll them out strategically through communication efforts. So over the next 12 months, I'm going to softly start speaking to our community and our stakeholders through posts, through messaging campaigns about how increased officers might make a difference or how we could utilize different officers or that kind of stuff. So really it's about taking your goals and helping roll those out strategically through communications. That's a lot what the Master PIO program is.
Gotcha. I think a lot of people don't realize that, even though we move along as they take the NPR, and then how do we deal with those things? Because as you said, we're not, knock on wood, thank goodness, we're not dealing with a crisis every single day. So, especially with recruitment, retention, smaller agencies are losing people, and it's making it tough. So that is something that your PIO or that person can be doing all the time, is promoting your department, promoting what you're trying to do, promoting the good things that are happening within the organization, because you're not dealing with the crisis at that time.
Recruiting is one of the funnest things that PIOs have a role in, because we're the ones typically orchestrating the post and the messaging that's going out. And one of the things that on day one, we talk about branding. It's not something that has always been used in law enforcement. I don't think 30 years ago, we thought that we needed to brand ourselves like corporate entities do. But now we realize more than ever, like, branding is important. What our community's perception of us is, what our potential recruits' perception of us, what that is. So we're constantly selling our culture, right? We're selling what we have and the things we can offer you and the money that we have, and certainly just your opportunities that you can come to thrive in. I often say a lot of times too, and I'm a college football fan. I feel like law enforcement and college football have so many similarities in the way they've went. One, we're constantly recruiting, right? That's the thing that's never changing. Same thing. You're looking for that 5-star, that 4-star player. Only these massive universities with all the swag and the big stadiums and the pimped out locker rooms, they're the ones that are landing these 5 stars and 4 stars. And then when you look at the other agencies across America, right, they're kind of like the small universities and colleges, these D3 schools. They're getting like somebody that was never ranked or has no ratings, but that's what they can get. And it's real similar with American policing agencies. America is made up of small agencies. The large agencies, New York, Baltimore, those are small in numbers. Mm-hmm. Most of the police agencies in America are small. And so what are we doing to show them through our messaging that it's a good place to work, right? I would argue that sometimes you can outbid somebody with culture over money. If I can show them through proactive messaging campaigns, through our different media stuff that we're doing, our things in the community, our branding strategy, if I can show them that, hey, the chief is going to support you, the community loves you, right? The rank and file here are going to help you thrive and learn and grow. And there's going to be different opportunities for you to try things. A lot of people don't realize that small agencies will sometimes give you a lot more growth opportunities. They'll give you a lot more responsibility opportunities quicker than a large agency will. So you got to sell it. And that's another big important component of what your PIO can be doing when those crises aren't taking place.
I know you're a Vols fan, so.
Go Vols.
So I think it's funny that you say that, because I've always used a baseball analogy, because when I've had my town talk to me about things like that, and I've sat with town administrators, and they always ask that question. I said, well, sometimes you have to let your ego go, and you have to realize that you're the farm team, and you have to embrace that. And sometimes for small agencies, we have to embrace the fact that a lot of the percentage of the people you're going to get, you're going to train and they're going to move on. So why don't you train them the best way that you can, that when they're ready to move on, that you're their advocate to move on? Because, we can't give them the things that large departments do. Like, I'm never going to have a canine unit. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm never going to have a detective unit. I'm never going to have, motorcycle unit, because that's just not going to happen with a small agency. And as you alluded to, 80% of this nation's departments are, less than 50, less than 50 people.
Yeah.
And 70% of them are 10 or less. So be the best that you can be. Embrace that thing that you're a farm team, and you might get lucky. Once in a while, you may get that one person that just loves that small town. I was that guy.
Yeah.
I was that guy. I had opportunities to go other places as my career grew, and I just enjoyed working at small departments.
See, and then just by you saying that I would already sit down. If you and I were doing this, I would tell you, oh, that's awesome. That's our niche, because I realize that a department your size, we've got to know our audience, and our intended audience is going to be that person who loves this town, a person who is born and raised here, a person that loves having their family next door. That's the person, that's the guy or gal we want to recruit for your department, because that's the person that will stay. And there are people out there, there are amazing cops out there that will take A over B. Behind door A, you've got a massive department that's got all kinds of options, resource, helicopters, drones, dogs, motorcycles, boats, horses, whatever, cat units. I mean, they've got everything nowadays, right? Behind door, but you're also, by the way, you're also a number, you're a serial number.
Yeah.
And you work for a man or a woman who will never know who you are.
Right.
And you may never even talk to them. Behind door B, yeah, we don't have all those bells and whistles, but you've got a chief that'll know your wife's name, your kids' names, that will remember your birthday by heart, that every time you walk in the door to come to work, that chief will put their arm around you and tell them that they love you and they appreciate what you do. And the cool thing about that is there's men and women all over America that want to work for door B.
Right.
Because that's what they want. They want to work on a team that's close-knit. Their family's down the road. They'll never leave home. And that's the man or woman that we have to recruit to come to work for you, because that's what you're able to give them that these massive metropolitan departments will never be able to give them.
That's an awesome take. We talked a lot about LEDA. I think we talked a lot about the MPO, but as you know, I'm a big officer wellness and mental health person. I mean, that's just kind of become my thing. And I think one of the greatest things that I see that you, to me, and this is just me seeing you out there and what you do, you have a great work-life balance. You make a lot of fun out of what you do. And I think that's an important thing. And I think that is something that I try to now. I didn't do it. I got full disclosure. That wasn't me before. I mean, I was a work. I was that guy. When you called me, I was there. I was dropping everything, moving. I lived for work. Fortunately, I learned too late. Well, I can't say unfortunately learned too late, because it's in the last year or so, my mindset has shifted so much that I don't do that. This podcast, doing what I do now, dude, this has helped me more than any other thing that I could ever think I could do. And I never thought I would do this. But you have things like flying.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. So how did you really get into, I know you just pretty much finished with within the last year to be able to fly solo. So how did you ever really get into that? What led you to that?
I grew up in a wonderful family, but I definitely grew up in a middle-class, hardworking family that paycheck to paycheck was a terminology I learned as a young kid. I always wanted to be a pilot. My dream job was not to be a cop at first. My dream job was to be a commercial airline pilot. Now I'm gonna pause for a second. If my mom was listening, which she will at some point, she would interrupt us, and she would tell you that my dream job, my first job, was to be a school bus driver. When I was a young kid, I thought that was right. So she likes to tell people that and embarrass me, so I'll embarrass myself. But Chris, I never, at my age, I'm almost 45. You could not become a commercial airline pilot back then unless you went to an aeronautical university like Middle Tennessee State or Emory-Riddle, one of those big aerospace universities, or if you had to serve in the military and get on as a pilot and serve for years and get those flight hours. That was who Delta and United hired. I never thought it was an option. Fortunate enough to start to get my feet in law enforcement at an early age. My godfather was a state trooper. I did one of my first ride-alongs at 18. The first night I rode, we got in a pursuit, and I was hooked. Yeah, so that's kind of where the path took me. When I retired 2 years ago, and this does tie into mental health a lot, I'm glad you brought it up. So I was very active at work. One, being a squad commander, I had a group of young guys and gals underneath me who were my life. They were my kids, if you will. Every one of them was, under the age of 28, so all young enough to be my kids. I was very active in our command staff in our department, helping to drive and steer that agency forward. And when I left, I knew I needed something to do because I went from my phone ringing overnight all the time, getting called out on big high risk stuff, my phone ringing constantly, me getting to tackle challenges and help solve problems, even just pulling up next to my folks in the middle of the night. That I call it that cop car cuddle, when you pull up beside each other and listening to their problems at home and the things that they were challenges they were facing in raising a young child or whatever that was. I went from that to overnight nothing. No more phone calls. Nobody needed me anymore. Essentially, that's the best way to put it. And that was difficult. Flying for me, I found, was something to completely take my mind off of my new life. And I think that's where, you hear those stories about you'll hear stories about when I was younger, especially. Oh, Lieutenant Smith, he worked for 42 years. He retired and he died last year. He's been off a year and he died. Or you hear some guy 6 months out of retirement dies. I tell people, even at my younger age of retirement, I realized really quickly, I think it's because people don't have a plan and they don't have something else to make them feel purposeful in this life. So I started flying. I started taking lessons back in Knoxville. And we moved to Colorado. I went out there to a school and finished. So I've got like 150 hours now, just enough to be dangerous. But I tell people I found the one thing that was actually scary to me. When people used to talk about being a police officer or being a state trooper out in the middle of I-40 by myself at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're like, were you ever scared? I'm like, no, not really. Like, I was careful, and then if the hair stood up on the back of my neck, I listened to it. They're like, what scares you? I'm like, landing a plane by myself. That terrifies the heck out of me. And to this day, because it's so unpredictable and the wind can really just change your methods when you're landing. So I found something that's different. It's outside the normal. And I still feel like I have a passion, which is super important.
I think you're doing great things with Lita. And some of the things that you're doing out there is you're enjoying life, man. I mean, I live vicariously through you sometimes. I really do see some of the stuff that you're putting out there. When you're out there doing things and I see you like embracing all of you guys, Sarah, yourself, Adam, like when you guys put your stuff out there, you're not only teaching, but you are really engaging with these folks and like visiting stadiums and doing what they like to do. I think there was one thing you guys were out on horseback. Like,
Yeah.
it's like some awesome stuff there, man. That is so great.
Well, we preach from day one. One, we kind of force our classes to go to lunch together, which is unusual for law enforcement officers. Sometimes when you suggest that on Monday, you get some weird looks. And by the end of the week, it makes sense to them and they love it. But we talk about the importance of, if you're going through a crisis, that you're not alone. Because many PIOs are by themselves at an agency, right? And when they have that unexpectedness that happens at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they find themselves like, oh my God, what do I do? We want them to realize on Friday when you leave FBI Lita, now you have 15 to 25 other colleagues that you've built a relationship with this week. And you also have an instructor that you've built a relationship with. That's why we try to do stuff with them outside of class. I went horseback riding in Oklahoma 2 weeks ago on a farm with a couple of the guys after class. I'm an aviation junkie, so I've flown in some of their helicopters with them after class. That's not just to keep us busy and for us to have fun. That's to build a relationship. Right. Because the one thing that Lita does, and I love, we're not selling a consultant fee. We're selling a relationship. And what we're saying is, if you have that, let's say you have that line of duty death tomorrow night at 2 o'clock in the morning, I want them to know by the time they leave on Friday that they can pick up the phone and they can call me at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to come sit right here and I'm going to help them manage to write some type of horrible message that announces the death of one of their colleagues. That's the relationships I think that I know all the other instructors would tell you. Adam and I were talking about it today online. That's what we're cultivating. It's not just a 5-day class and we're done with you. It truly is. This is a relationship, and you're a part of the Lita family now. And from the top down, Jock and Michael, they support it. I don't think they realized when they first came on, I don't think they realized how many hours a month that Stephanie, Sarah, Adam, Paul, myself spend consulting and helping other departments long after we've had them in class. I probably get 2 to 3 phone calls a week, Chris, helping agencies through something difficult. And I love that. And so, yeah, so when you see us in class building those relationships, it's because we want them to know that you're stuck with us. You got us for as long as you need us.
I think that you hit the nail, and I didn't. I don't turn this into an FBI LEDA like plug, but
Yeah.
but people have to realize when people ask me why I chose to do what I do for FBI LEDA, because I don't get paid, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying I should. I don't get paid. LEDA to me was exactly what you said. It's an organization where it builds relationships, gives great training. Every instructor for FBI LEDA is top notch. Not only the ones that I've had throughout the years, but I've had the opportunity being on this board to meet each and every person who is an instructor for this organization, and they're all class grade A people who do exactly what you said. They're available to their students all of the time. And I have people tell me, I just went to a class in Florida a couple weeks ago. And the first thing they told me is, hey, I had to call Les about something, and like he just picked the phone right up because I didn't think he was serious, and he was right on. I said, look, buddy, they are serious, because that's what this organization is. It's great. It's a great organization with training. All of our instructors are top notch, but it is the networking and the bonds that you make while you're with this organization and beyond that are just unbelievable. I tell a lot of my people, it's like being old school cop again. It's like it was when I first got into public safety and law enforcement, when you did things together, you knew each other's families, you were there, you go to weddings, you go to this, that's that feeling that it gives you. And that comes from each and every one of you. And I think that is just awesome. And I am so happy for the way that you guys do those things. And that's why it takes a special person to be an instructor for that organization and for
I'll
this
tell you,
organization.
even for us, when I open class on Monday, one of the first things I do is I ask people who have taken FBI LEDA classes before. So I know they've not taken media because it's the NPR, the basic class, right? So I'll get a lot of hands nowadays, which I love. They're like, hey, did my trilogy. And so I always ask them who they had. When I hear the name, like when I hear Lewis and Les and Adam and Jennifer and Anthony Batts, I hear these names they're putting out that they've sat in class with. I'm reminded these men and women have set the bar extremely high as instructors. And so we in the media team, because we really respect all those other instructors, I got to keep up. I mean, I got to be as great as Lewis or as thought-provoking as Jennifer. And I'm trying to dress as good as Les, but it's not happening, right? Yeah, I can't get that dress down. Yeah, if Les hears this, oh, man, that's usually how, if somebody's like, oh, man, I had the guy that dresses great. I'm like, Les, yeah. But they do. And we as instructors, even though I don't teach on the trilogy side, I can't tell me times that I'll have a phone call with Lewis and talk about how class is going or things that's working for us. Jennifer Harris and I, she and her son came down and stayed with us at the beach and took him flying. But Jennifer and I share ideas about how we open class. And so now I've pulled ideas from her. It really is. It's an opportunity that I never thought I would have, Chris. And I love what I'm doing. What I'm doing.
And I tell you, I love each and every part and being part of it. And it's very enjoyable to me. And I enjoyed having you on here today. Matt, I thank you for taking the time, my friend. You are the first FBI LEDA instructor that I have had on this podcast. There's going to be...
if I'd have known that, I would have dressed like Les. I would have.
I said, I already saw it. I have my Elvis socks for the next time we go.
I would have dressed. I appreciate you having me on here. And if this does anything, I hope it inspires another law enforcement leader, another chief or a sheriff or somebody in command staff to say, hey, I listened to Matt and Chris talk, and it's a conversation we need to have at our next staff meeting. Maybe it's time that we start thinking about putting someone in one of these trainings so that if something happens, we're prepared so that we can maintain the trust that we work so hard to build with our community. That's what it's about. It's about when bad stuff happens, being able to message it out in a way that your community sees you as competent and capable and professional, so they can continue trusting you through everything. So I hope that, if anything, I hope this conversation makes somebody, even if it's just one person, say, hey, it's time for us to get on board with this.
That is kind of the purpose of this, right? Even if one person says, hey, that's one more person that wasn't doing it before. And
Absolutely.
that gives us that opportunity to do this. I mean, you have conversations, you do it. Yeah, we might mess around, we might laugh and joke, because that's what it is. Like,
Yeah.
we're trying to have that serious conversation, and it is serious. Like, we're not just messing around. It's a point that we bring forward that it's important enough for us to talk about, and to be able to do those things, and to also do the same and care about your people, man. Care about your people. Make sure that you're getting the word out there. Make sure you're giving them time. Make sure you're allowing them to enjoy the finer things of life. Because, Matt, I'm gonna tell you, you're a young man, dude. I envy you. I really do. I think that you're a great person and a great voice for that. And
Well,
I
thank
think
you.
that you putting that out there.
I appreciate you calling me young. I need to hear that once in a while, because after 4 knee surgeries and 2 back surgeries and waking up every morning with a different pain somewhere,
I get it.
it's nice to hear that I'm still young to somebody.
Hey, I got 11 years on you, brother. And trust me, it's breaking down a lot more than it's working right now.
I had a friend of mine, he's a Nashville police officer. He just turned 37 today, and he was talking about being old. And I'm like, man, what I wouldn't give to be 37 again.
I tell people, you know what? I wouldn't mind going back, but I wouldn't want to lose the things that I know right now. Like, if I could go back and not lose the
Yeah.
experience, I'd do it
Yeah.
in a heartbeat. But
100%.
my friend, I thank you for your time. I enjoy it. Be safe out there on the road.
Chief, thank you.
We appreciate everything you do, and we will be seeing each other in person very soon.
Yes, sir. Keep spreading the good word, and I appreciate you again having me on.
You got it. You take care of my friend and stay safe.
Yes, sir.